The stars shimmered like distant jewels as Sergeant Jack Callahan sat silently at the controls of the small reconnaissance ship. His team had been assigned to patrol the outer rim of the galaxy. The mission was routine, simple survey work through the vast stretches of uncharted space. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A sudden jolt shook the vessel, followed by the screech of metal and the flickering of lights. As alarms blared across the cockpit, Jack's hands flew to the controls, his mind already processing the situation. The sensors were showing multiple ships incoming, and they were not human. The Exurkai, a ruthless and technologically advanced alien species known for their brutal raids on unprotected colonies, had found them before they had even detected the threat. The alien ships descended upon them from the black void of space like predators, descending on their prey. Jack cursed under his breath as he grabbed the communicator to alert his crew, but the message was cut off in an instant. The Exurkai had already locked onto their ship with energy weapons, rendering their systems useless. The hull groaned in protest as the ship was dragged from its intended course and into the grasp of the alien vessels. The view outside was filled with the sight of enormous alien warships, their dark armored hulls and jagged silhouettes looming in the distance. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained calm. This wasn't the first time he had been in a firefight. He had survived worse, yet even as his mind raced for options, his body remained steady, every move deliberate and calculated. The Exurkai ships boarded with terrifying precision, their gravity fields pulling the human ship toward a massive mothership that loomed over the wrecked vessel. As Jack's team prepared to fight for their lives, the doors to the cockpit slammed open, and a cadre of heavily armed Exurkai soldiers stormed in, their bodies rippling with unnatural strength, their weapons crackling with energy, their voices alien and guttural as they barked orders in a language none of the humans could understand. Jack and his team fought back fiercely, but the alien warriors were too strong, their technology too advanced. In mere minutes, the remaining humans were subdued, shackled, and dragged from their ship without mercy. One by one, they were hauled away as prisoners of war. Jack refused to break, even when the aliens jabbed sharp needles into his neck to inject something that made his body feel numb. His mind remained clear, his eyes never wavered from the path ahead. He would survive, he always did. The Exurkai snickered as they observed the human prisoners, thinking them no more than weaklings who were too primitive to offer any real resistance. Their leader, a towering figure in black armor, addressed the prisoners with a sneer before turning his back on them. The humans were herded into a large holding cell where the other prisoners were kept, all of them broken and defeated. But Jack refused to lower his head. His gaze remained unyielding, staring ahead. As the cell doors clanged shut, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't going to give the Exurkai the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. The Exurkai thought they had captured a broken man, but they were wrong. They had just made their first mistake. The moment Captain Ethan Harper's consciousness began to return, it was as if his body knew it was no longer on the battlefield. He was disoriented, his muscles aching, his head throbbing from the impact of whatever had knocked him out. The taste of blood lingered in his mouth, and his body was still filled with the strange heaviness of the drugs they must have injected to keep him subdued. His eyes fluttered open slowly, revealing the cold, metallic walls of a ship that stretched far above him. The air was thick, heavy with the hum of alien machinery. He could feel the presence of the Visari around him even before he saw them. Their tall, sleek forms hovered in the shadows, watching him like predators sizing up their prey. He was no longer on the surface of the planet. They had taken him aboard their vessel. The alien ship was far more advanced than anything humanity had ever dreamed of. Its design was sleek, streamlined, and it hummed with a quiet, eerie energy that seemed to reverberate through the air. But none of that mattered now. He had been captured, but he would not surrender. As he came to, the Visari's commander, a towering figure named Zhorik, approached. His deep-set, glowing eyes bored into Harper with an unsettling intensity. The aliens had perfected the art of intimidating without a single word. Their presence alone was enough to unnerve most. But Harper held Zhorik's gaze without flinching. In the face of this overwhelming force, the human spirit, in all its defiance, refused to break. Human, Jorik's voice echoed in the sterile chamber. It was calm, yet its coldness sent a shiver down Harper's spine. You are an anomaly. The others, your fellow soldiers, they died like dogs. But you continue to live. Harper was bound to a chair in the center of the room, but his body was already working in overdrive. His mind raced, calculating every possible way he could escape. The Vezari may have taken him, but they had underestimated what a human could endure. His silence only fueled their curiosity. The commander gestured to two of his soldiers, who stepped forward with something that made Harper's blood run cold, a large glowing device designed to probe minds. It was a weapon unlike anything Earth had ever seen. One touch could break a person's will, rip away their thoughts, and leave them a hollow shell. It was an alien tactic, a way to conquer the mind before the body. But Harper had something the Vezari had not accounted for, an indomitable will. Before they could activate the device, Harper's voice cut through the silence, low and measured. You can't break me. Jorik stepped back, intrigued. He wasn't accustomed to prisoners speaking so boldly, especially when faced with the full force of the Vezari's mental technology. What makes you so sure? Harper stared at the commander, his voice unwavering. Because you don't know what it means to lose everything and still keep fighting. You don't know what it's like to have nothing left but your will to survive. The alien stood still for a moment, as though processing his words. The idea of humanity's resilience, its defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, was something they had never understood. It wasn't just survival that drove humans. It was the refusal to be broken, the refusal to be subjugated. Jorik looked at Harper with something approaching disdain. Foolish human, you will break, just like the others. You will beg for mercy, and you will tell us everything we want to know. Harper smiled despite the pain, despite the fear. I'm not afraid of you. The alien commander's eyes flashed with fury, but he masked it quickly. He wasn't used to such insolence. The device activated with a soft, ominous hum, sending waves of energy toward Harper. His vision began to blur, and his muscles tensed as the pressure of the mind probe intensified. But Harper focused. He focused on his training, on his comrades, on the countless battles he had fought before. He refused to let them win. His mind was his own, and no alien device would change that. As the pressure mounted, Harper's grip on his own thoughts tightened. He would not be their puppet. He would not fall like the others. And even as the Vezari watched, expecting him to break, something inside Harper snapped into place. They would regret underestimating him. The pressure from the mind probe intensified, a sharp, stabbing sensation shooting through Harper's head like 100 needles piercing his skull. His body trembled, his breath coming in shallow gasps, but through it all, he remained determined. The Vezari commander, Jorik, watched with cruel fascination as the human soldier struggled, expecting the usual result: fear, weakness, eventual compliance. But Harper's thoughts were a fortress. He had faced pain before, much of it far worse than anything this alien technology could deliver. His training, his experiences, and the very essence of his identity as a soldier kept him grounded. The probe burrowed deeper, and for a moment, Harper felt his grip on his thoughts begin to slip. His vision wavered, and his senses dulled. Then, with a sharp mental snap, he forced himself back to focus. He thought of his comrades, their faces flashing before his mind's eye. He thought of his home, Earth, his family, his friends, and the soldiers he had fought beside. Those memories were his anchor. He wouldn't let the Vezari take them from him. They could tear at his mind, but they would never own it. With all the strength he could muster, Harper locked his mind behind an iron wall. The probe surged with energy, but it could no longer reach him. Jorik, sensing the shift, clenched his fists in frustration. You cannot hide from me, human, Jorik sneered. I will break you. I will find your weaknesses. But Harper didn't respond. Instead, he kept his gaze steady, unwavering. In that moment, it was as though the walls of the interrogation room itself recognized the shift in power. The Vizari commander could not break him, not through technology, not through force. Jorik stepped back, visibly perturbed, and signaled to the two soldiers holding the mind probe. They reluctantly deactivated it, though their eyes lingered on Harper as if expecting him to crumble in the absence of the machine's control. Harper, however, remained still, breathing heavily but steady. "Impressive," Jorik muttered, his voice cold but tinged with a rare respect. "You are unlike any human we've captured before. But this is only the beginning. You will submit eventually. No one can resist forever." Harper didn't reply. He knew better than to speak now, to give the Vizari any satisfaction. Instead, he waited, calculating his next move. This was far from over. The aliens may have the upper hand for now, but he had something they didn't, a will to survive and a mind that no probe could ever truly control. After a long pause, Jorik's voice broke the silence once more, though it was tinged with a different sort of anticipation. "Take him to the combat room," the commander ordered. "Let us see if his body is as resilient as his mind." Harper was roughly dragged from the chair and shoved into a new, sterile chamber, an arena of sorts, though smaller than he expected. He was now standing face to face with several Vizari warriors, each one armed with deadly energy blades and reinforced armor. The room was lined with advanced weaponry and training drones, a place where prisoners were made to fight for the amusement of their captors. The Vizari warriors circled him like predators, their eyes glinting with hunger. Harper's hands were still bound, but it was clear they intended to make him fight with everything they had, physically and mentally. They would see if his human body could endure the kind of punishment their species had dished out to countless prisoners before. Harper's mind raced. This was not just a test of strength, it was an opportunity. His restraints were tight, but not indestructible. His heart pounded in his chest, but he pushed back against the instinct to panic. He had to find a way out. There was always a way. He knew one thing for sure: this would not be the Vizari's victory. Not today. As the warriors closed in, Harper's muscles tensed, and a new sense of resolve flooded through him. His training, his instincts, they had prepared him for moments like this. He had fought through worse, and he would fight again. The Vizari might control the ship, but they did not control him. The warriors raised their weapons, expecting an easy kill. They had underestimated him before, and now they were about to regret it. Harper smiled grimly. If they wanted a fight, he would give them one they would never forget. As the Vizari warriors closed in, their weapons gleaming with deadly intent, Captain Harper's mind raced, calculating every move, every possible strategy. They had expected him to cower, to fall to their strength and superior technology, but they hadn't counted on one thing: the fire that burned within him. His hands were bound, his body bruised, but his mind was sharp, and he had been through worse. The first warrior lunged forward, his energy blade crackling in the air. Harper reacted instinctively, twisting his body to the side just as the blade sliced through the air where his neck had been a moment before. He could feel the heat of the weapon on his skin, but he wasn't fazed. He ducked low, narrowly avoiding a second strike as another warrior closed in from the other side. With his hands still bound behind him, Harper couldn't rely on his usual combat techniques. But he wasn't defenseless. His legs were still free, and that was all he needed. He pivoted on his heel, sweeping one leg out to catch the approaching warrior off balance. The alien soldier staggered, momentarily losing his footing, and that was enough for Harper to act. He kicked hard, aiming for the warrior's chest, knocking him back several feet. The Vizari stumbled, disoriented, giving Harper just enough time to reach out and grab a fallen weapon. The alien blade clattered to the ground, its light flickering as it deactivated. Harper snatched it up in one fluid motion, holding it in both hands, using the brief moment of confusion to his advantage. He might not have had the luxury of proper training with alien weapons, but he had fought with everything from knives to rifles to improvised tools. He knew how to adapt. and he was adapting quickly. As the Vizari warriors recovered, their confidence faltered. They had expected an easy kill, but Harper was not the kind of soldier who gave up without a fight. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter, anticipating every strike, every feint. When the next warrior charged him, Harper blocked the incoming blow with the weapon, using the alien's own momentum against him. With a swift twist of his body, he disarmed the warrior, sending the blade flying from his grasp. The Vizari soldier growled in frustration, but Harper didn't give him a chance to recover. He used his momentum to land a brutal punch to the warrior's face, knocking him out cold. The remaining Vizari soldiers hesitated, momentarily thrown off by Harper's unexpected skill. The human soldier was outnumbered, yes, but they had underestimated him. He was not just some prisoner to be toyed with. He was a fighter, and he was making that painfully clear with every move. The room was filled with the hum of alien technology, the shifting weight of battle, and the crackling sound of energy blades. But amid the chaos, Harper's focus never wavered. His eyes locked on each target, calculating, moving, striking with precision. Every time a warrior came at him, Harper was ready, parrying, dodging, and counterattacking. His mind was a whirlwind of strategy, each move designed to create an opening, to break through their defenses. But the fight wasn't just about physical strength. It was about resolve, about sending a message. The Vizari had captured him, humiliated him, but they had no idea what they had just unleashed. Harper wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for Earth, for humanity's future. And that thought drove him forward, gave him the strength to keep moving, even when his body screamed for rest. The warriors, realizing that they couldn't overpower him as easily as they had planned, began to retreat, regrouping to rethink their tactics. But Harper wasn't about to give them the chance. He charged, using the alien blade as an extension of his own body, moving with a fluidity and speed that the Vizari hadn't anticipated. One by one, the aliens fell. They weren't prepared for a fight like this. They had underestimated the human spirit, and they were paying the price for it. In a final, desperate attempt, the last warrior lunged at Harper, but the human soldier was already several steps ahead. With a swift motion, Harper deflected the strike, spun around, and with one clean, efficient movement, he disarmed the alien, sending his weapon crashing to the floor. The warrior's eyes widened in disbelief, but it was too late. Harper's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground in defeat. Breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his brow, Harper stood tall over the fallen warriors. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's engines and the pounding of his own heart. The fight was over, but this was just the beginning. He had sent a message, loud and clear. No matter how many they sent, no matter how advanced their technology, humanity would never bow to their will. Not today. Not ever. The silence in the combat room was deafening. Harper stood amid the fallen Vizari warriors, his chest heaving with exertion. His hands still bound but now holding the alien weapon tightly. The once feared invaders who had descended on the human outpost with such confidence now lay defeated, sprawled across the cold floor of the chamber. Their arrogance had turned to disbelief. They hadn't expected this from a human. This relentless spirit, this refusal to yield. Harper's mind was already moving, strategizing. He knew this victory was only a small step in a much larger war. He had to escape. He couldn't afford to linger and bask in this moment of triumph. The Vizari would not take kindly to their warrior's humiliating defeat, and it was only a matter of time before they came after him with even more intensity. But for now, this was a small victory, a crack in the Vizari's impenetrable armor, a spark of hope in the darkness. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a way out. The walls were smooth and unyielding, but the door to the far side of the chamber was slightly ajar. That was his only opening. Harper's mind raced as he calculated his next move. He had no illusions about the Vizari's ability to retaliate. If anything, this was just the beginning. They would come for him with everything they had, but Harper was ready. He had always been ready. Carefully, he made his way to the door, his movements cautious but deliberate. The halls beyond the combat room were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. The ship seemed to be in disarray, as though the Visari were still recovering from the shock of his unexpected resistance. It was now or never. He had to move fast. As Harper crept through the corridors, he noticed the flashing lights of the ship's security systems beginning to flicker. The alarms hadn't yet sounded, but it was only a matter of time before the Visari realized what had happened and began their hunt for him. His senses were heightened, his every step calculated as he moved deeper into the heart of the alien ship. He had no idea where he was or how to navigate the labyrinthine vessel, but that didn't matter. His training had prepared him for this. It wasn't about knowing the ship. It was about finding the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, and exploiting them. And the Visari had just given him his first opportunity. He turned a corner and froze. Ahead of him, 2 Visari soldiers were standing guard, oblivious to his presence. They were too far away for him to take them down quietly, and they were too close for him to slip by unnoticed. Harper's mind raced. He couldn't afford a direct confrontation. He needed to remain undetected for now. The soldiers were blocking the only path forward, and there was no other way around. He needed a distraction. Harper's gaze flicked around the corridor, searching for anything he could use to his advantage. His eyes landed on a small maintenance panel on the wall just to the right of the guards. The panel was barely noticeable, but Harper could tell it was connected to the ship's power systems. If he could disable the lights or cause a short circuit, it might be enough to throw the guards off their guard. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device, the same one he had hidden on him before the Visari captured him. It was a modified EMP grenade, something he had used in previous missions to disable enemy electronics. It wasn't powerful enough to take down the entire ship, but it would be more than enough to disrupt the immediate area. Harper activated the device, quickly ducking behind a nearby crate just as the grenade discharged. A pulse of energy surged through the corridor, and the lights flickered and died, plunging the area into darkness. The guards reacted immediately, their weapons raised, trying to make sense of the sudden blackness. Harper seized the opportunity. With swift, practiced movements, he lunged forward, tackling the first soldier to the ground. The Visari struggled, but Harper's training in close combat was too much for the alien to handle. In seconds, the soldier was incapacitated, and Harper grabbed his weapon. The second guard turned just in time to see Harper's weapon aimed directly at him. There was no hesitation. One shot, and the second soldier crumpled to the floor. Harper didn't wait around to see if the disturbance would draw reinforcements. He knew his time was limited. The EMP grenade had bought him a few precious moments, but that was all. He sprinted down the darkened corridor, moving faster than he ever had before. He had to keep moving. If he stopped, if he allowed himself to be caught, everything he had done so far would have been for nothing. As Harper turned a corner, he came face to face with another door, this one slightly ajar. It was the ship's central command room, and he could hear the faint hum of voices coming from inside. The Visari were regrouping. Harper's heart raced. This was it. If he could get to the control systems, he could start sabotaging the ship from the inside. He could turn their own vessel against them. But time was running out. He pushed the door open, stepping into the belly of the beast. Harper's heart thudded in his chest as the door to the command room creaked open. He had no idea what awaited him on the other side, but he knew one thing. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The Visari might still be disoriented from the EMP pulse, but it wouldn't last long. He had no choice but to move fast, to make the most of the opportunity he had just created. This was his moment, the only one he might get. The command room was dimly lit, its walls lined with intricate alien technology. Holographic displays and glowing consoles filled the space, creating an almost ethereal glow. At the far end of the room, a group of Visari officers huddled around a central table, focused on a map of the galaxy projected before them. They didn't notice Harper at first. Their attention was fixed on the display, oblivious to the human infiltrator in their midst. Harper's mind raced. He could see the main control terminal, just a few steps away from where the officers stood. If he could reach it, he could access the ship's systems. He could disable its weapons, shut down its communications, or even reroute the ship's trajectory to cause a collision with a nearby asteroid field. It wasn't much, but it could buy him enough time to escape. Time for humanity to respond, to gather forces, to strike back. He edged quietly along the perimeter of the room, keeping his movements slow and calculated. His pulse was steady, his breath controlled. His military training had prepared him for moments like this, where every decision mattered. He had to remain undetected for as long as possible. But the closer he got to the terminal, the more tension built in his muscles. The Visari were unpredictable. One wrong move, one false step, and it was over. As he moved closer, one of the Visari officers turned sharply. Harper froze, his heart pounding in his throat. The officer's eyes scanned the room, narrowing as they seemed to settle on Harper for just a brief moment. Time seemed to stretch. But then, the officer's gaze flicked away, and Harper exhaled in relief. The alien hadn't seen him. Not yet. Harper took another step, his boots silent on the metal floor. He was almost there. He could feel the faint hum of the ship's systems pulsing in the air, vibrating through the walls. His fingers brushed the cool surface of the console, and he let out a quiet breath. Now he had to focus. The Visari ship's technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, but Harper wasn't new to high-stakes hacking. He had worked alongside engineers and tech specialists on Earth before. If he could just find the right access points, he could manipulate their systems, create chaos. He bent over the console, quickly scanning the interface. The controls were alien, but there were familiar patterns within the data streams. Harper's mind clicked into gear, his fingers moving quickly as he located a sequence of commands. He accessed the core systems and began to work his way through the ship's defenses. Every keystroke felt like an eternity. He had no idea how long he had before the Visari realized what was happening. A sharp sound cut through the air, the unmistakable hum of a Visari officer activating a comm device. Harper's heart skipped a beat. He had been spotted. They were about to note he was here. Without thinking, Harper slammed his fist against the console, activating the emergency override. Sparks flew, and a holographic display flickered wildly. It was a temporary distraction, just enough to buy him a few seconds. The officers turned, alarms beginning to blare. But Harper had already initiated a cascade failure within the ship's systems. The power grid began to overload, and the lights in the room flickered as the consoles blinked out of existence. The officers shouted in confusion, moving toward the consoles in a frantic attempt to regain control, but it was too late. Harper's quick thinking had bought him the edge he needed. With one last motion, he hit the ship's engine control module, rerouting the ship's power from its engines to its emergency shields. The ship's momentum halted, and a sudden jolt shook the room. "Breach in the system," one of the Visari officers yelled, his voice rising in panic. "Deactivate the override." Harper didn't wait for them to react. He turned on his heel, sprinting toward the exit. The Visari were already moving to counter the attack, but they wouldn't be able to recover in time. Not fast enough to stop him. He darted into the hallway, his mind already planning his next move. He had caused enough chaos to keep the Visari off balance. Now he just had to get to the escape pods. The ship's alarms blared, and Harper knew that the Visari would be scrambling. He had a narrow window, and it was closing fast. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept pushing forward. The Visari had made a grave mistake underestimating humanity. Now it was time for them to pay the price. The ship's alarms shrieked louder now, the sound almost deafening as Harper sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors. The Visari were on high alert, scrambling to regain control of their ship, But Harper knew he had created enough chaos to give himself a chance. The ship's systems were in disarray, and that would slow them down. But the Visari weren't easy to shake. They would be hunting for him, and he couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when he was so close. He turned another corner, almost colliding with a group of Visari soldiers rushing the other way. Harper skidded to a halt, his instincts kicking in as he dropped into a crouch behind a stack of metallic crates. His pulse raced, and his breath came in shallow gasps as the soldiers passed by, oblivious to his presence. He remained still, not daring to make a sound. He could hear them muttering in their alien tongue, but he didn't risk a glance until they were out of sight. With the immediate danger past, Harper exhaled a quiet sigh of relief and took off again. He had to keep moving, keep pushing forward. His mind was racing, calculating the fastest route to the escape pods. His eyes darted to every sign, every junction, trying to find the quickest path to freedom. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The ship's layout had become more familiar with each turn, the once foreign hallways now etched into his memory. He had seen enough to understand the layout of this vessel. The corridors were designed to be a maze, but that was nothing new. Humans were survivors, and Harper was no different. He had learned to adapt quickly. But now it wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message. If he could make it out of here alive, the Visari would never forget what a human could do when pushed to the edge. As he rounded a corner, the escape pod bay came into view. There were 2 guards standing by the large metal door, their weapons raised in alert. Harper's stomach tightened. He had anticipated this. He had known the Visari would have security here, but this was the moment of truth. He wasn't armed with anything more than the stolen Visari blade, but Harper wasn't about to let that stop him. He had one shot at this. If he failed, it was over. He moved quickly, ducking into a nearby alcove to avoid being seen. The guards were too busy talking to notice him yet. He could hear their low, rumbling voices, but he didn't have the luxury of time to listen. He needed to make his move before they noticed the chaos he had caused. Harper surveyed the situation. The door to the pod bay was electronically locked, and the guards were stationed right in front of it. He could take them out, but that would create noise and alert the entire ship. He needed something more subtle. His mind raced as he searched for a solution. Then it hit him. The control panel on the wall beside the door. If he could disable the security system, he could open the door and slip inside before the guards even knew what had happened. It was risky, but it was his best shot. Harper crept toward the control panel, keeping his movements as quiet as possible. The guards were still talking, their backs to him. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the panel. With a careful twist, he pried open the panel's casing. His eyes flicked over the wires and circuits, and he quickly identified the main connection that controlled the door's lock. He had no tools, but he had his training. Using his knife, he carefully cut through the wire, sparking the connection as the system shorted out. The door to the escape pod bay groaned as it began to open, slowly and quietly. Just as the door slid open enough for Harper to slip through, one of the guards turned. "What's that sound?" the Visari soldier asked, his voice alert. Harper didn't wait to find out. He darted through the opening, his heart racing. The door slammed shut behind him with a hiss, and he was in the pod bay. The escape pods were lined up in neat rows, their sleek, silver surfaces reflecting the dim lighting of the room. They were meant to evacuate the crew in case of emergency, and right now, Harper could think of no better use for one of them than his own escape. He quickly moved to the nearest pod, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He keyed in the emergency launch code and sealed the hatch behind him. The pod's engines hummed to life, and Harper gripped the controls with a fierce determination. He had one shot at this, one shot to get off this ship and live to fight another day. As the pod's thrusters roared to life, Harper could feel the ship's gravity beginning to give way, the pressure in the cabin lifting. The viewports flashed with the sudden, sharp light of the ship's external systems powering down in a final, desperate attempt to stop him. But it was too late. Harper was free. For the first time since his capture, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had escaped the Visari vessel, but he knew this wasn't the end. The war was far from over, and the message he had sent today was only the beginning. The Visari had made a mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn the true cost of that mistake. Harper set course for Earth, knowing full well that his fight had only just begun. Harper's fingers tightened around the control lever of the escape pod as it shot through the empty expanse of space, far away from the Visari ship. The small vessel rocked slightly as it detached itself from the wreckage of the enemy ship. His heart pounded, the adrenaline of his narrow escape still coursing through him. His mind, however, was already shifting gears, calculating the next move. His victory, though significant, was only a small victory in a war that was far from over. He had sent a message, yes, but there were still thousands of Visari out there, still poised to invade Earth. As the pod's navigation systems took over, Harper allowed himself a few seconds of respite. The ship's shaking subsided, and the viewports revealed the stars stretching out in all directions. The vast emptiness of space had always been both awe-inspiring and terrifying, but now, in this moment, it felt strangely comforting. For the first time in what felt like forever, Harper could just breathe. But his respite was brief. His escape wasn't without cost. His body ached from the combat, and the exhaustion of everything he had just endured weighed on him like a lead blanket. He hadn't even had a chance to clean the blood from his uniform, but there would be no time for that. He needed to make contact with Earth. They would need to know what had happened. The Visari had underestimated one human soldier, but that wouldn't happen again. Humanity would be ready. Harper accessed the pod's comm system, fingers flying over the controls. It was a standard emergency transmission protocol. He needed to send a distress signal, a warning. He hacked into the frequency system and sent out a signal, using the encrypted channels meant for high-priority military communications. The message was brief, succinct, but it carried the weight of everything he had just endured. "This is Captain Harper of Earth's military forces. I've escaped from the Visari ship. They are targeting Earth. Prepare for an all-out invasion. They will not stop until they conquer. Reinforcements required." This is not a drill. He hoped Earth's military was listening. They had to be. He had to believe that there were others out there, preparing to fight back. His survival was proof that humans could withstand the odds, that they could outthink, outfight, and outlast the Visari. Harper slumped back in his seat, exhausted, but his mind kept racing. He thought about his crew, about the soldiers who had fought with him, who had given their lives to protect Earth. He had to live, for them, for humanity. The message he had sent would be the spark that ignited a much larger resistance. His eyes drifted to the control panel, and he noticed the faint flashing of an incoming transmission. The comms were live. Someone was responding. He hesitated for a second, a knot tightening in his stomach. What if it was a Visari trap? What if they had tracked him? But then he pushed the fear aside. He had made it this far. He wasn't going to back down now. He opened the channel. The face that appeared on the screen was human, young, tired, but resolute. "Captain Harper, this is General Martinez. We're tracking your signal. You've made it out, and we've heard your message loud and clear. Reinforcements are on the way. You're not alone. Hold tight, Captain. Earth will fight." Harper's throat tightened, and for a moment, his mind swam. He was no longer just one soldier against the invaders. Earth was standing with him. The fight had only just begun, but humanity had not given up. They were ready. "Thank you, General," Harper managed to say, his voice rough but determined. "I'll hold the line until you arrive." For Earth. As the communication ended, Harper turned his gaze back to the stars. His escape had bought time, and time was something humanity needed. He wasn't alone. They were coming. They were ready. The Visari would regret laughing at humanity. They would soon learn that the human spirit was not something that could be broken, that it was not something they could conquer. Harper had shown them that. He was the first to escape their grasp, but he wouldn't be the last. And when Earth's forces arrived, the Visari would know that they had made the greatest mistake of their lives, underestimating humanity. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since his capture, Captain Harper allowed himself a smile. Humanity had just begun to fight back, and they would win.